Good evening. Welcome back for our Old Testament Bible study in Genesis. Well, we've just been doing a chapter a week, and we're already in chapter 14. We've left Abram and his nephew Lot. Their herds got so big that they had to split up. Abraham said to Lot, you go wherever you think the grass is better and greener, and I'll go the other direction. And he was generous to him, and Lot says pitched his tent toward Sodom. And well, we find war going on now in the world. Chapter 14, it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, that's one, and Arioch, king of Eleazar, two, Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, three, and Tidal, the king of nations, four. Four kings in that verse. These four kings, they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zebulun, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. So these four kings, they attacked these other five kings. Now, just overview, well, we know Sodom, Gomorrah, and Zoar are mentioned with these five, the kings of the five. And that's over here where Lot's living close to Sodom. We're going to meet all those again in the next few chapters. All three of those, you'll meet Sodom, you'll meet Gomorrah, and you'll meet the little town of Zoar. So these four kings attacked these other five. All these were joined together in the Vale of Sidon, which is the Salt Sea. 12 years now they served Kedorlaomer. That means for 12 years these five loser kings, they paid tribute to Kedorlaomer, the king that would won. They were paying their taxes. That was how they were staying out of war further. But in the 13th year, they rebelled. So for 12 years, they paid their tribute, and then they said, we're not going to do it anymore. In that 13th year, they rebelled. So then in the 14th year, well, you know what's going to happen. They're going to have to come and try to punish their subjects. In the 14th year came Kedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and they smote the Rephaims and Ashtaroth, Carnaim, and the Zuzims and Ham. They're coming through the land dealing with all these people that had rebelled against them, not paying their taxes to them. And verse 6, and the Horites in their Mount Seir unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness, and they returned and came to another place in Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and they smote all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites that dwelt somewhere else. And there went out the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah. Now we're going to get to the big showdown, right? And the king of Admah and the king of Zebulun, and the king of Bela, these five. And Bela is another name for the little town of Zoar that we mentioned. And they joined battle with them in the valley of Siddim, with Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, with Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Eleazar. Four kings against the five. And the vale, or the valley of Siddim, was full of slime pits. There's a bunch of swamps in it, we'd say. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. They're getting whooped. They fell there. And they that remained fled to the mountain. So the enemy, in verse 11, these other four kings, they come in and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah. And all their victuals, too. That's 1611 English. Victual, they took all their food. If you remember the Beverly Hillbillies, Jethro like victuals, that's where that come from, the old King James victuals. They took all their grub and they went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son. So now they've got Abraham's nephew. They're getting down to the personal level. See, all that other stuff was just telling us here's how Abraham got involved in this. He got pulled into this war because they carried his nephew Lot off POW. They took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom. The last time we found him, he just lived, he pitched his tent toward Sodom, but he's pulled him on in now, ain't it? And they took his goods, and they departed. And there came one that had escaped and told Abraham. So he wasn't involved till now. They said, hey, they've captured your nephew. They told Abram the Hebrew, which here Abram's called a Hebrew. I think the word literally just means he's a nomad. He's a wanderer. He's watching over his flocks. For he dwelled in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. So all these people on the side of these 5 kings says they were confederate, kind of like the Civil War here. The Confederates mean they just joined together to fight on the same side. Of course, the enemy called them rebels. They rebelled against them, right? And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants. Now remember, last week we learned that Abraham had returned from Egypt and said Abram was very rich. Here's how rich he is. He's got, find out here, 318 servants that are just trained as military guys. He armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318. And Abram pursued them unto the land of Dan, which is named that later, before Moses writes this, after one of the sons of Jacob, Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night. I think in this verse it means there's 318 of them. They pursued them, and when it got dark, half of them went on one side and half of them went on the other side, and they set up an ambush, and probably in the dark when they attacked them by surprise, they turned and ran into the other half of them. It was strategy. He pursued them to Dan. He divided himself against him, he and his servants by night, and he smote them, Abraham and his servants. And he pursued them. They're running from him. Pursued to Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus down in Syria. And he brought back all the goods. And there was a lot of stuff now. All the stuff that the invading army had carried away, Abraham and his servants, they go in there and they whip them and they take it back. And they're carrying it all back home now, victorious. And also, Abram brought again his brother Lot. Now, in the Hebrew, there's no word for nephew. We know that it's his brother's son, Lot. And he brought his nephew back. That's the only reason Abraham got involved here. It became a family matter. And he brought Lot's goods, and the women also, and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after the return from the slaughter of Kedar-Laomer, that other bad king, and of the kings that were with him, at the valley of Sheva, which is in the King's Dale. And now, this whole chapter has been an introduction to this fellow right here. You have to have this background to be introduced to this fellow by the name of Melchizedek. And Melchizedek, he comes back, and here we are. We haven't met him yet, have we? He comes back out of here, just steps into the pages of the Bible, and just here's this fellow named Melchizedek that we've never met before. And he's like this mysterious character. And all we know about him so far in the Bible is what it tells us right here, but he becomes a prominent place in the Bible. If you want to do some more study on your own after we finish here, go over and read Psalm 110 about Melchizedek. That's the second place we find him in the Bible. And then go over and read, there's several chapters, like 7, 8, and 9, right in there, 6, 7, 8, and 9, about Melchizedek in the book of Hebrews. And the writer of Hebrews, Paul, I think it was, is using Melchizedek to say, hey, he was a type of Christ. It's an argument even whether he might not be Christ. But it's not that clear, but it says he don't have any beginning of days, he don't have any ending of days. Well, some say that just means there's no genealogy listed for him here. But Paul in Hebrews keeps making the point, and it says, by the first century, all Jews knew how great Abraham was. But Paul says, see how great this man Melchizedek was. That Abraham paid him tithes. We're going to getting ahead, but Abraham's going to give him 1/10 of all the spoils. And Melchizedek, this great man who's called the high priest of Salem, which Hebrews tells us Salem means peace. I've also read that's a very ancient name for Jerusalem, Jerusalem. And here was the King of Peace. Well, in the New Testament, we know the King of Peace is Jesus. So either this is the pre-incarnate Christ or just a very strong type of Christ that comes out. And Paul says, see how great this man Melchizedek was? Said everybody knows that the less is blessed by the greater. But it wasn't Abraham who blessed Melchizedek. Said Melchizedek came out and he blessed Abraham. And Abraham paid him tithes of all that he had. And when we meet him here in Genesis, what do we find Melchizedek do? He's coming back and he offers Abraham bread and wine? Now, we New Testament Christians, we see a picture of maybe a Holy Communion there, standing for the broken body and the shed blood of Christ. Melchizedek's a very interesting study. And here's where we first meet him in the Bible, verse 18 of Genesis 14. Melchizedek, king of Salem, he brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. This is before we ever got a priesthood over in Moses' day, but back here it says, here's this man Melchizedek. He's the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him. Melchizedek blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which delivered your enemies into your hand." And he is Abraham, gave Melchizedek tithes of all the spoils, all of his increase. He gave him a tenth of them. And the king of Sodom said to Abraham, "Give me the people, give me the persons, and you take the goods to yourself," which was really, Abraham had the right to them anyway. That was the law back then. He went and conquered and got them back, so they belonged to him. But Abraham says, "No, I wouldn't even take a thread of a shoelace, or else you, O king of Sodom, will be telling everybody, you made me rich." King of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the persons, take the goods yourself." And Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I've lifted up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I'll not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I'll not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I've made Abram rich." We learned the last chapter. Abram, the Bible says, was very rich already before this incident. And Abram knew where his riches had come from. They come from God, and he didn't want to give this pagan king the opportunity to say, "I'm the one that made Abraham rich." Abram said, "Except only here that which the young men have eaten," as the army traveled, they had to eat, "and the portion of men which went with me," names of them, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, "let them take their portion. But king, I'm not taking the rest, because I won't have you saying you made me rich, because I know my blessings come from God." Yours do too. See you next week for chapter 15.